If you were going to try to illustrate in graphic form the idea of air in air, what better image than a bubble? A bubble is air in air. And the suit of swords is the air suit, and the Prince of Swords is heir of air. Even his little fairies there that are pulling his chariot have bubble wings. That was pretty ingenious of Lady Harris. Okay, we're moving on to the suit of swords and the court cards of swords today. From Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. I hope everybody had a good Monday. And are ready for the next installment. We'll start with the Knight of Swords, Fire of Air. And here he is. And we see some birds flying there. Cool horse. He's got a couple of swords out. But what the hell is that? Is that a helicopter? We'll find out. The Knight of Swords, Fire of Air, rules 20 degrees Taurus, 20 degrees Gemini. I also put up probably a hard-to-read chart that I created to show the rulership of at least the knights, queens, and princes' court cards as they relate to the tarot and the zodiac and the various spirits of Kabbalistic magic. I posted it just before this video. 20 degrees Taurus to 20 degrees Gemini is roughly May 11th through June 10th. He rules the 7 of Discs, the 8 of Swords, and the 9 of Swords. They all live inside him. The original titles are Lord of the Winds and the Breezes, King of the Spirits of Air, King of the Sylphs and Sylphides. The crest is a winged hexagram. The symbols are a winged brown horse, driving clouds, and drawn brown sword. His hair is dark brown, his eyes are dark. In just a snippet of a letter from Harris to Crowley of an uncertain date, I have done as you have suggested to the swords. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. You were quite right. She doesn't always say that. Swords are the suit of air. As we begin our examination of these cards, I must point out a design motif that appears repeatedly in all the cards of this suit. Wings. Lady Harris incorporates angular, highly stylized wings everywhere. They may not always look like wings, but that's what they are. Beginning with the Knight of Swords, we see what appears at first to be 4 propeller blades spinning atop his pointed helmet. Right there. But they're actually 4 triangular wings sprouting from his back. They are transparent and veined like those of a dragonfly. Perhaps there are only 2 wings and are moving so fast they appear as 4. Please take a moment and look at the Queen, Prince, and Princess of Swords and locate the marvelous angular wings on these figures. And I'll hold them up in a minute. Now look at all of the small cards of the suit and see the backgrounds festooned with these stylized wings. Some balanced, almost pinwheel in form, some twisted, broken, stretched, and distorted. It has been suggested that these figures represent magical sigils drawn from planetary chimeras or magical squares. Anyone familiar with the extent, or I should say the limits, of Lady Harris's magical education at the time would not even suggest such a thing. The Knight of Swords is fire of air, suggestive of a violent wind. The general divinatory meaning of the card can be summed up in one word: attack. The moral qualities of a person thus indicated, Crowley warns, quote, are activity and skill, subtlety and cleverness. He is fierce, delicate, and courageous, but altogether the prey of his idea, which comes to him as an inspiration without reflection, unquote. Famous Knights of Swords include Baron Munchausen. I hope you're familiar with that character, both in fiction and in reality. He's a tall tale teller. He's a liar that would put Mark Twain to shame. Okay, Baron Munchausen was a Knight of Swords. Arthur Conan Doyle, Pope John Paul II, Malcolm X, Queen Victoria, John Wayne, John F. Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, and Cher. Sky blues, yellows, and whites, cirrus clouds dominate the card, as they do the Queen of Swords. Okay, that we'll talk about right now. The Queen of Swords. You don't want to cross that lady. My good friend Thalassa, who is a Queen of Swords. I was once at a birthday celebration for her, and however they did it, the top of the birthday cake in icing was this image, this perfect image of the Queen of Swords. Pardon my digression. The Queen of Swords is water of air. 20 degrees 20 degrees Virgo to 20 degrees Libra. September 12th through October 12th. She rules the 10 of discs, 2 of swords, and 3 of swords. The original titles are Queen of the Thrones of Air and Queens of the Sylphs and Sylphides. Her crest is a winged child's head, and we can see that right there on the top. Symbols are the head of a man severed, cumulus clouds, and a drawn sword. Hair is gray, and her eyes are light brown. From the Book of Thoth, Crowley says this: the person symbolized by this card should be intensely perceptive, a keen observer, a subtle interpreter, an intense individualist, swift and accurate at recording ideas, in action confident, in spirit gracious and just. Wasn't that nice? Crowley's had something nice to say about a card. And do you know why? This card represents Crowley's This card represents Crowley's sun sign, and so naturally it's the most intimidating card in the deck. One look at this lady tells us she means business. Water of air suggestive of clouds that promise either life-giving rain or the threat of a torrential cloudburst. She holds the severed head of a bearded man in her left hand and the sword that probably did it in her right. One may think this grisly touch is just another gruesome Crowleyism. It is not. This image is the classic Golden Dawn description of the Queen of Swords and makes a fundamental Kabbalistic statement. The suit of swords represents Yetzirah, the formative world, the mind's eye of deity. Swords and Yetzirah's counterpart in the human soul is the Ruach, the intellect which is centered in the brain, the human head. Using the sword of discretion and reason, the Queen has separated the higher faculties of the intellect from the influences of the lower nature, the nephesh, or the animal soul. She is quite literally, as Crowley points out, the liberator of the mind. The head is that of a bearded man, the hermit of Virgo, perhaps. The eyes closed peacefully, this face suggesting the trance of deep meditation. Let's see, get a little closer look at that head. Almost looks like a oriental sage. The influence of Virgo moving into Libra gives the Queen of Swords the practicality and grace of a great monarch. This native should be intensely perceptive, a keen observer, a subtle interpreter, an intense individualist, swift and accurate at recording ideas, in action, confident, in spirit, gracious, and just. He just doesn't have anything bad to say about his own sun sign. Her movements will be graceful and her ability in dancing and balancing exceptional. If ill-dignified, she can be as cruel and as dangerous as she looks. Crowley's fellow Queens of Swords include Mahatma Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, H.G. Wells, and Stephen King. And let's not forget Thalassa. Sky blues, yellows, and white cumulus clouds dominate this card. Okay, now we'll move on to the Prince of Swords that we had a little look at first. Mr. Bubble Man. The man in the bubble chariot. Prince of Swords, era of air. 20 degrees Capricorn to 20 degrees Aquarius, roughly January 10th through February 8th. Rules the 4 of discs, the 5 of swords, and the 6 of swords. The original titles, the Prince of the Chariot of the Winds, Prince and Emperor of the Sylphs and Sylphides. The crest is a winged angel's head. The symbols are arch fairies, winged, dark clouds, nimbi, drawn swords. The hair is gray, the eyes are dark. From the Book of Thoth. It's easy to be deceived by such people, for the manifestation itself has enormous potency. It is as if an imbecile offered one the dialogues of Plato. They may in this way acquire great reputation, both for depth and breadth of mind. An earlier version of this card paints a kinder, gentler picture of the Prince of Swords and arch fairies who draw his chariot. The final version is full of mad, seemingly futile movement. The geometrical wings of the prince and the children are enclosed in bright yellow bubbles, air of air. The children pull the chariot, quote, irresponsible in any direction that takes their fancy. They are not rein, but perfectly capricious. The chariot, consequently, is easy enough to move, but quite unable to progress in any definite direction except by accident. This is the perfect picture of the mind, unquote. Like a madman whose brain creates only to destroy, we see the prince with his sword in his right hand with which he creates ideas and images, and the sickle in his left hand with which he immediately cuts them down. This sounds like madness, but we're doing the same thing every moment of our waking lives. When the mind is given a creative outlet for this process, such as music, literature, or filmmaking, we discover great geniuses. Mozart and Mendelssohn were princes of swords, as were the great film directors W.D. Griffith and Federico Fellini, and the visionary Emanuel Swedenborg. Crowley heaps great praise upon the pure intelligence of the Prince of Swords, but he cannot avoid discussing the futility of thinking about thinking. Quote, he is full of ideas and designs which tumble over each other. He is a mass of he is a mass of fine ideal unrelated to practical effort, unquote. The great actor James Dean was a Prince of Swords. And while Jim Stark, the character he played so brilliantly in the film Rebel Without a Cause, was fictitious, but Dean nonetheless gave profound life to that role. In my mind, it was the perfect tortured portrayal of the frustrations inherent in this card. A performance that I believe in all likelihood would have been appreciated by fellow Princes of Swords, Edgar Allan Poe. Clouds of sharp white crystals, yellows and metallic greens dominate the card. And finally for this morning, the sandstorm, the dust clouds, the dust bowl of the avenging angel. See her wings? Her wings are on her back. They look very angular. Princess of Swords, Earth of Air. Together with the Ace of Swords, she rules the Capricorn Aquarius Pisces celestial quadrant above the North Pole and the area of the Americas. The original titles are Princess of the Rushing Winds, the Lotus of the Palace of Air, Princess and Empress of the Sylphs and Sylphides, Throne of the Ace of Swords. Her crest is a Medusa's head. Let me show you that. Silver altar, or the symbols are a silver altar, smoke, cirrus clouds, a drawn brown sword. Her hair is light brown, her eyes are blue. From the Book of Thoth, Crowley says, the character of the princess is stern and revengeful. Her logic is destructive. She is firm and aggressive with great practical wisdom and subtlety in material things. She shews great cleverness and dexterity in the management of practical affairs, especially where they are of a controversial nature. She is very adroit in the settlement of controversies, unquote. Rising out of a cloud of dust, Crowley's paradoxical Princess of Swords, Earth of Air, appears like a beautiful, avenging angel. Her head is crowned with a Medusa-headed helmet, which mercifully is turned away from our view, for if we were to gaze upon its awful face, we would surely be turned to stone. Turning things to stone, fixation of the volatile, or the materialization of an idea, is just part of the job description for the Princess of Swords, however. The suit of swords, as Ruach, the intellect, is a wonderful aspect of our being because when we identify with the Ruach, we rise above and separate ourselves from our lower nature, the animal soul, or the nephesh. However, when we identify with the Ruach, we also separate ourselves from the higher parts of our soul that represent greater realities and levels of consciousness than our Ruach is capable of comprehending. Consequently, the Ruach does everything it can to keep its grasp on our identity. This is why Eastern mystics warn us that the mind is the great enemy. It must be defeated in battle. When the battle begins, the Ruach naturally sends its finest swordswoman into the field, the warrior princess who manifests everything that is inherent yet hidden in her lord the ace. A mighty champion of the mind, a Minerva, an Artemis, a Valkyrie, Princess of Swords. Swirling clouds of gray-black dust and violent wind bursts darken the heavens and almost completely dominate and obscure what once was the yellow and blues of this suit. Since princesses do not rule degrees of the zodiacal year, we have no examples of celebrated personalities who are or were Princess of Swords. But I bet we can all think of a few people whose personalities match that. If not, perhaps we're lucky or unfortunate. Whatever. We've gone our allotted time this morning, and I really appreciate you being with me every morning. I know we're all going crazy during these times, and this is certainly helping me cope with these trying days. But anyway, tomorrow we'll pick it up with the suit of discs, the court card of the suit of discs. And I hope you'll be with me tomorrow. So until then, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is law. Love under will.